them for you, and I'm going to lend Katie a hand whenever she needs it. She's already begun our glass blowing journey here today by collecting a little bit of molten soda lime glass on the end of a hollow stainless steel blowpipe. She's organizing this material and soon will begin the inflation process. The type of glass that she's working with today is called soda lime glass. It's the most common variety to melt in this setting, but it's also the most common variety to have in your homes in different formulations. There are tens of thousands of different recipes for glass, all with the same base of silica sand. This one is silica sand, soda ash, and limestone combined together. And she just blew through the end, capped it with her thumb. That air has nowhere else to go but into our molten material. But this is just the start. At 2100 degrees, this material has the fluidity of honey. So it's really challenging for us to wind up as much as we might need in one go, so we like to collect the glass that we need in these layers that we call gathers. This will be just a 2-gather piece. A little does go a long way with this material. All the pieces lining the front of the stage were also made with 2 gathers of glass. So you can see the wide variety of shapes and forms we're going to be able to achieve with this amount of material. You'll also hear glass blowers refer to, oh, I made a 3-gather bowl or a 4-gather pitcher. Just refers to the amount of material, the amount of times you went into that furnace. Every time we gather, we have to let one layer cool down and solidify. So Katie is letting that chill out so it can support the weight of another gather of glass. But cold is a relative term to us glass blowers. Around 1000 degrees is when the material will become stiff and rigid and stop moving. And a little bit below that temperature range is actually when our glass could break at. Now Katie has let this cool down and solidify. She'll dip back into the furnace, turning in one even direction in our lake of glass and wind up 2 to 3 times the amount of material. But this rotating motion that she does to wind up that glass won't stop throughout the entire process. If you notice, Katie's left hand will never stop turning. She's almost like a human lathe. This is how we fight against gravity's pull downwards on the glass and keeps everything nice and on center. This is one of the trickier parts about being a glass blower, but at a certain point it's more like breathing. Katie really doesn't have to think about that constant rotating motion. You can always spot a glass blower outside of the studio. They'll turn broomsticks and pool cues in their hands as well. It's really just a force of habit at a certain point. Katie's organizing this material with a couple different wood-based waterlogged tools. She just used a block of cherry wood to create a nice Q-tip-like shape. Now we like to use fruit woods because they have a tight grain pattern and a low resin content. But that block spends its entire life inside water, so it actually creates a layer of steam to form the glass instead of burning through the wood itself. Now this is a more interesting tool, one of our favorites. And this is a pad of the local newspaper. It's about 6 to 10 sheets thick, folded up into thirds a couple of times, saturated in water as well. But it's the closest we get to touching the glass with our bare hand. But your hand does not get hot at all using this tool. Now she's made this into a nice tapered shape, which gives me an idea that Katie plans on going into a molds. We have a couple different choices of optic molds and textural molds at the front of our stage. All these molds are made out of either bronze or aluminum. And hot glass likes to stick to other hot things, but cold metal and hot glass really don't stick to one another. Now in a factory setting where you might be going into these molds every 5 minutes, the metal will eventually heat up and start sticking to the glass. But we really only go into these molds every hour or so, so they're not getting toasty enough to heat up and stick to our material. But she'll drastically change the texture of this bubble when she comes out of the mold going in there. And this is really the only time that we inflate with all our force. A lot of people think it takes lungs of steel to be a glass blower, but if you can blow out birthday candles, you can blow glass as well. It's not as challenging as you might think. But that mold really took away a lot of the heat from this material, so she has to immediately go back to that reheating chamber. But it's just a textural mold, so it's a finishing mold by no means. And it looks like Katie's going to push this texture just a little bit further by twisting up those straight ridges to create more of a spiraled effect. Now Katie knows exactly what she's going to make. She knew before she even took that first gather. The glass doesn't really give you a lot of time to think about your next steps in the process. Oh, and look at this. Going back into the mold once again. This is what we refer to as a basket weave pattern. And you're going to be able to see it really well on the screens. But kind of this bowl here is also that same basket weave texture that we're going to be aiming for here today. So we can really use these molds in a variety of manners. But this texture will stay on as long as she doesn't overheat this material. Now it's more about temperature management and control. As long as Katie doesn't spend too much time in our secondary reheating chamber, that basket weave pattern will stay all the way through to the end. She's using gravity to her advantage as well, with the heat off that reheating chamber allowing the glass to naturally elongate. We'll have to spend more and more time at that secondary reheating chamber as the glass gets thinner and thinner. This chamber is kept at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, but the only glass inside of there is on the end of our iron. You might be curious about this view you're getting right now. It's very unique to us here at the Corning Museum. You'll only really see this here. And that's because the type of glass that protects the camera at the back of our chamber was invented here in Corning. So we don't have a GoPro Inferno that can withstand 2100 degrees, but we do have a type of glass that can. At the back of that chamber, there's a tiny little sheet of pure fused silica. Pure fused silica melts around 4000 degrees Fahrenheit, so that 2000 degree chamber will never get hot enough to melt through that sheet of glass, and that's what keeps the camera nice and cool. Now this type of glass was invented here in Corning by Corning Incorporated in 1934. Originally, they really didn't know what to do with the type of glass that melted at that high temperature range, but now it's being used for this camera angle, and NASA has also taken quite a liking to this type of glass because it can handle the heat of re-entry into our atmosphere. Very similar temperature ranges to the inside of this reheating chamber. So it's currently the windshield on the space shuttle, and it's gone on just about every manned space mission as well. But it's also a very optically pure type of glass. So it's being used as the core of all fiber optic cables, our way of everyday communication. A really cool piece of glass technology that we have access to. But Katie is making quick work of this form, and she put in a little constriction between the blown form and the blow pipe. And every once in a while she'll go back in. Right now, this pair of jacks is what she used to create that constriction. And it's about to show you why we put that in. Whether we're making a bowl, a plate, a pitcher, a glass fish, it all gets that constriction put in early on. If you've ever dropped a cup on your kitchen floor, you know glass does not like to break in nice, even, and uniform patternings. So we need to set up a weak point where we know it's going to fail at. Almost like the lines in a chocolate bar that tell your chocolate where to break, we're doing the same idea with the glass here, and it's for this exact move right now. Katie just let me know that she would like me to create what we call a punty. It's just a little gather of glass on a solid iron, but instead of immediately bringing it on over to her, I'm going to shape and cool this gather of glass into a nice Q-tip-like shape. This is the trickiest step in the process, and when most new glass blowers will lose their work, as all the temperature control and timing Katie's about to use is learned through experience, and more oftentimes than not, failure. So that punty is hot enough to stick on, but cold enough to break free later on. And that constriction is around 1000 degrees. We induce thermal shock with a couple cold drops of water, and a light knock to the iron breaks that free. Can we have a round of applause for Katie? That does not always go according to plan. In your first couple of years, that's when you get out the broom and the dustpan. More oftentimes than not, that punny is a little too chilly and falls into this conveniently located bucket at the base of the bench. Or that constriction is too far under 1000 degrees, and we re-enter 2000 degrees of fire to find cracks form along our piece. We say for those reasons that it takes about 3 to 5 years to be considered a proficient beginner in glass. Nothing else in life really prepares you for that constant rotation that Katie's been keeping up, and also to read the temperature and the timing of the glass. But this is going to be a pretty long heat, a great point in time if anyone might have any questions or curiosities I might be able to answer for you.
I have heated? Are they electric, gas? How are the ovens heated?
Yeah, so how are our ovens powered? And that's actually very unique to this stage. This is an all-electric run setup, and that's very uncommon. It's pretty common nowadays for this furnace to be run off of electricity, and the kilns are always, but that all-electric reheating chamber is actually something that was developed and patented by the museum. So if you go down to our amphitheater, that's all run off of natural gas, and you'll hear the loud roars of those furnaces being powered by that. But we created this all-electric reheating chamber so that we'd be able to do more mobile glass blowing to places where you might not be able to have that continuous supply of gas be possible. One of our favorite outreach programs was glass blowing out at sea. So we had about 3 luxury cruise lines with all this pieces of equipment on there, and we would send glass blowers out to blow glass at sea. But you can imagine the difficulties of getting natural gas or propane tanks in the open ocean. They really don't like that hazardous on the top of cruise lining ships. Now those pieces of equipment are still on those ships, they're just no longer manned by Corning glass blowers. And it is a little bit different with the temperature and the timing. This chamber is a little bit colder than it would be run off of natural gas or propane, the most common fuel sources in most studios. And this reheating chamber, traditionally with the natural gas, would be able to be shut off every night and come up to temp in the morning. This guy takes about 16 hours to get up to temperature, so at night we just let it lull and then bring up to temperature in the morning. Now this furnace though, that runs 24/7, no matter what setup you have. This particular furnace has been on for about 3 years now. The one on our amphitheater has been on for 8. So it runs until we need to shut it off for maintenance to be done. You have a question up there? Be real loud for me. How do they make glass?
Before this was available.
Oh, before this all was developed. Yeah, how would they make glass? And that's a great question. So the fuel sources nowadays are electricity and gas. And prior to that, we actually used coal. That's what really brought Corning here, is the coal mines of Pennsylvania used to be the fuel source for all these pieces of equipment. Prior to that, it would be wood and bellows. Glass blowing has been around for about 2,000 years now, and glass forming has been around since